The rain in downtown Atlanta wasn't falling, it was attacking. Sheets of water hammered the streets, bouncing off curbs and windshields, turning every puddle into a mirror for chaos. Amara Johnson clutched her coat tighter around her body, her breath visible in the cold air. The wind slapped at her umbrella until it folded in on itself like a wounded bird. "Perfect," she muttered, tossing the broken thing into a trash can. She was late, again. The bus had stalled 2 blocks away. Her phone was dying, and the ride she'd ordered through the app had vanished from the map. Typical. She glanced around for a miracle, any miracle, and that's when she saw it. A sleek black sedan slowing down right in front of her, the same model as in the Uber confirmation she'd seen seconds before her phone went dark. "Thank God," she whispered, splashing through the puddles toward it. She yanked the back door open and slid inside, dripping water onto spotless leather seats. "Hi, sorry I'm late. Please, could you drive faster? I can't miss this interview." The man behind the wheel turned his head slowly. His face was sharp, symmetrical, his suit too expensive for any Uber driver she'd ever seen. His gray eyes studied her, calm but unreadable. "Excuse me," he said. His voice was low, even the kind that could command a room or silence one. Amara waved her hand. "I know traffic's insane, but please just go straight then, right after the cafe with the French name. You'll see a glass tower that's Stonebridge Media. My interview starts in 15 minutes, and if I'm late, they'll hire someone else." He blinked once as if weighing his options, then shifted the car into drive. "Thank you," she said, exhaling. "You're a lifesaver. I'll rate you 5 stars, 6 if that's a thing." He said nothing. Only the sound of rain filled the silence. So she continued trying to distract herself from her anxiety. "Do you always keep your car this clean?" "Smells like new leather and money. No offense, but this ride feels like the inside of a bank vault." Still nothing. Amara sighed. Strong, silent type. "I get it. Uber drivers probably hear enough drama for a lifetime. I'd write a book if I were you. Confessions of a Silent Driver. Bestseller, guaranteed." For the first time, she saw the corner of his mouth twitch. Barely. They stopped at a red light. Her reflection stared back at her in the window, tight curls frizzed from the humidity eyeliner, smudged one earring missing. She looked less like a job candidate and more like a cautionary tale. "You ever notice," she said, "how people look at you differently depending on what neighborhood you're in? I walked 3 blocks just to get picked up because nobody stops around Vine City after dark. Guess I can't blame them." The driver's knuckles tightened briefly on the wheel, but he said nothing. When they reached the Stonebridge building, she pointed toward the side entrance. "Here's good. Less chance of anyone seeing me like this." He parked perfectly by the curb. "Thank you again," she said, opening the door. "You saved my career. Seriously, I'll give you a great review soon as my phone revives." He met her eyes through the rearview mirror. "You might want to check whose car you're getting into next time." Amara laughed nervously. "Noted. Stay dry out there." She slammed the door, ran across the slick pavement, and disappeared into the building. The man watched her go, a faint, almost imperceptible smile crossing his lips. Inside, Amara darted through the lobby, heart-pounding shoes squeaking on marble. She barely made it into the elevator before the doors closed. Her reflection looked like a drowned cat. "Not the first impression of the century," she muttered. The elevator opened to the top floor, modern sterile white walls and chrome everything. She spotted the receptionist and hurried over. "Amara Johnson, 10 o'clock with HR." The woman's eyes flicked up, scanning her from wet curls to soaked sneakers. "You're here for the media assistant position?" "Yes." "Wait here," the receptionist said, voice neutral but distant. Amara could feel it, the unspoken judgment. It wasn't new. It was the same look she got in stores, restaurants, even classrooms. A look that asked, "Are you sure you belong here?" Minutes later, a staffer led her into a glass-walled conference room filled with nervous candidates. Everyone looked polished navy suits, pearl earrings, perfect posture. Amara tried to blend in, but the damp smell of rain and the squeak of her sneakers made it impossible. The door opened. The room fell silent. A man entered, tall, commanding, wearing the same charcoal gray suit she'd seen behind the wheel. Her stomach dropped. The staffer beamed. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our new CEO, Mr. Arthur Collins. The room applauded. Amara froze the blood rushing in her ears. Arthur's gaze swept across the candidates and inevitably found hers. For a second, the world tilted. Their eyes locked. His expression remained professional, but in his gaze lingered the ghost of recognition and amusement. "Good morning," Arthur said smoothly. "I hope your morning commute was uneventful." A few chuckles rippled across the room. Not from Amara. Her heart thundered in her chest. Oh, God. Oh, no. I told the CEO to step on it. Arthur continued his introduction outlining company goals and leadership vision, but Amara heard nothing. Every word dissolved into a haze of humiliation. When the meeting ended, she tried to slip out unnoticed. Miss Johnson Arthur's voice stopped her at the door. Calm, deep, inevitable. She turned slowly. He stood there, hands in pockets, that same unreadable half-smile on his lips. Next time he said, "Confirm your driver's name." "Some of us don't take tips." Her cheeks burned. Yes, sir." "Understood." He nodded once, then turned back toward the window, already lost in thought. Amara escaped into the hallway, exhaling shakily. "First day," she whispered, "and I just mistook my future boss for a rideshare driver." She didn't know it yet, but that mistake, the wrong car, the wrong morning, the wrong assumptions, was about to rewrite everything she thought she knew about power, privilege, and love. The meeting adjourned with polite applause and the scraping of chairs, but Amara remained seated, frozen in place, as the room emptied around her. Her brain was still trying to process what had just happened. I told the CEO to go faster, not metaphorically, literally. Go, step on it. The humiliation sat on her chest like a heavy stone. She wanted to vanish, to dissolve into the carpet. But life as usual offered no mercy. A woman from HR approached her with a brittle smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Miss Johnson, the CEO, would like to see you in his office." Her heart sank. "Of course," she said, forcing a steady voice. The hallway leading to the executive suite was pristine black marble floors, abstract paintings, a silence so sharp it felt like judgment. As she walked, she caught her reflection in the mirrored wall. Damp curls, mascara smudged under her eyes, and one rebellious strand of hair standing up like a protest sign. She almost laughed, the face of diversity, she thought bitterly. When she reached the glass door labeled Arthur Collins, Chief Executive Officer, she hesitated. On the other side was the man who'd unknowingly become the punchline of her morning, and maybe the executioner of her career. "Come in," said that calm, unmistakable voice. She stepped inside. Arthur stood by the window, Atlanta's skyline reflected in the glass behind him. He didn't turn around right away. For a moment the silence was unbearable. Then softly, "Quite a morning. Wasn't it I?" "Mr. Collins, I'm so sorry," she blurted. "My phone died. I thought your car was my Uber. It was raining, I was desperate, and—" He finally turned the faintest flicker of amusement in his expression. "You gave me directions." Her face heated. "I did. You told me to turn right at a cafe that charges $9 for a croissant." "I did," she admitted, mortified, "and I stand by it. That price is criminal." He actually smiled barely, but it was there. "You're not fired, Miss Johnson." She blinked. "I'm not—" "No," he said simply, "but you are memorable." He walked behind his desk, his tone shifting from playful to professional. "You came here for the media assistant position, correct?" "Yes, sir. I've reviewed your file. Top of your class at Spelman internships at 2 agencies and a recommendation letter that used the word resilient 3 times. That's accurate," she said carefully. He looked up. "Tell me something, Miss Johnson. What do you want out of this job?" Amara hesitated. The safe answer would be experience or growth or stability, but something about his direct gaze pulled the truth out of her. "I want to be somewhere I don't have to prove I belong every single day." The room went still. Arthur's eyes lingered on her, not out of offense, but curiosity. "That's quite an answer." "It's an honest one," she said quietly. He studied her for a moment, then nodded once. "Honesty's rare here. You'll fit in." That surprised her. Fit in? She'd spent her entire career not fitting in. Not because she lacked skill, but because people made assumptions before she even spoke. The color of her skin carried a narrative she never wrote. Arthur gestured toward the door. "You'll start Monday. HR will send you details. And, Miss Johnson." "Yes. Next time maybe let the CEO drive himself." Amara cracked a nervous laugh. "Yes, sir." As she stepped out the door, shut softly behind her. She stood in the hallway for a full minute, stunned. She had a job, and a story she'd never be able to tell without cringing for the rest of her life. Her first week at Stonebridge Media felt like walking on a tightrope made of glass. Everything was polished, people, furniture, even the smiles, especially the smiles. On her first morning, she entered the break room and felt the shift immediately. Conversations paused, eyes flicked toward her, then away again. A man in a navy suit chuckled under his breath. "That's the Uber girl." She pretended not to hear. By lunch, the story had already made the rounds. The new black assistant mistook the CEO for a driver. Some told it like a comedy, others like a warning. Rachel, a friendly intern with bright red glasses, slid into the seat beside her. "You know, for what it's worth, it's kinda iconic," she whispered. Amara raised an eyebrow. "Iconic? I told my boss to hit the gas." Rachel grinned. "Yeah, and lived to tell the tale. Around here, that's legendary." Amara couldn't help but smile. For the first time that day, someone saw humor instead of humiliation. Later that afternoon, she caught sight of Arthur in the hallway surrounded by executives. He moved like he belonged to another world. Shoulders back, voice measured, confidence effortless. When his gaze found hers, he gave a small, polite nod. Nothing more. Yet it felt like something had shifted. Not kindness, not approval, something subtler. Awareness. That night as she rode the train home, Amara stared out the window at the blur of city lights. Atlanta was beautiful and brutal in equal measure, a city of dreams and divides. Across the aisle, two men in business suits glanced at her, then at the empty seat beside them. One placed his briefcase there instead. She sighed. It was the same everywhere. People like her had to work twice as hard to get half as far, and even then they were expected to smile about it. But she'd made it through the day. She'd survived the stares, the whispers, and even a CEO with gray eyes and a habit of turning her world upside down. When her stop came, she stepped into the rain again. The city smelled of asphalt and possibility. Somewhere behind her, high above the skyline, Arthur Collins looked out from his penthouse office at the same storm. And for the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about profits or shareholders. He was thinking about the girl who'd gotten into the wrong car and somehow made everything feel right again. The next morning, Amara woke to the sound of thunder again, only this time it came from her phone. Notifications. Dozens of them. New message. "Welcome to Stonebridge Media. New email, your ID badge is ready for pickup." And one from an unknown sender, conference room, B9 a.m. Arthur Collins. Her heart skipped. The CEO didn't usually meet with new hires twice in 2 days. She rushed through her morning, choosing a navy blouse, professional but safe, and a pair of borrowed heels that pinched just enough to remind her she didn't quite belong in this world yet. By 8:55, she was standing outside conference room B. Through the glass, she saw Arthur already seated, scrolling through something on his tablet. His suit today was lighter, his tie loosened slightly, but his presence still radiated authority. "Come in," he said without looking up. She stepped inside, closing the door behind her. "I wanted to thank you for yesterday," he said finally, raising his eyes. Her confusion must have shown. "For mistaking your car for an Uber." "For your honesty," he corrected. "You told me something most people in this building would never say to my face." Amara hesitated. "You mean about not having to prove I belong?" He nodded slowly. "Yes, it's stayed with me." She didn't know what to say to that. Her instinct was to shrink, to minimize her words. But she'd promised herself she wouldn't apologize for her truth anymore. "I wasn't trying to make a statement," she said. "It's just reality. For some of us, being here feels like walking through a room where every mirror is tilted." Arthur set the tablet aside. "And yet you're still here. I've had practice." That earned a faint smile from him. "Good, because I have an assignment for you." Amara blinked. Already I like to test initiative. He handed her a folder. Inside were logistics charts, room layouts, and inspection notes. We're hosting an investor showcase next week. I want you to review the facility, lighting, seating, everything, and compile a report. She frowned. Sir, isn't that more of a maintenance task? Yes, which is why I'm giving it to you. Her pulse spiked. It wasn't the kind of work she'd hoped for. It was the kind of job meant to keep new hires busy and unseen. But something in his tone stopped her from arguing. He studied her expression. You think it's beneath you? I think, she said carefully, that it's a test. Arthur's lips curved slightly. Maybe it is. Let's see how you do. That afternoon, Amara walked the corridors of Stonebridge with a clipboard and a determination she didn't fully understand. She inspected every flickering light, every crooked poster, every stain on the carpet. She jotted notes like her life depended on it. When she reached the executive lounge, she found a coffee machine sputtering half-heartedly. She bent down, fiddling with the settings. A few minutes later, coffee erupted across the counter, splattering her sleeve. Perfect, she muttered, grabbing paper towels. Add barista to the resume. Behind her, a voice said, "You missed a spot." She turned sharply. Arthur stood in the doorway, amusement flickering in his eyes. "Oh, great," she said dryly. "The CEO caught me losing a fight to a coffee machine." He stepped inside. "I was coming to check on your progress. Progress is steady, my dignity less so." Arthur leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "You take this seriously." "I take everything seriously," she replied. "People like me don't get second chances in places like this." He didn't respond right away. For once, his usual composure faltered just slightly. "You shouldn't have to think that way." "With respect, sir," she said, meeting his eyes. "I don't have the luxury not to." The air thickened between them. Outside, rain traced lines down the window. Inside, silence filled the space like static. Arthur looked at her as if seeing her clearly for the first time, not as the girl who'd embarrassed him, but as someone who'd been carrying a truth he'd never had to face. He broke the silence first. "I owe you an apology." Amara blinked. "For what?" "For laughing yesterday," he said quietly. "When I mentioned your mistake in the meeting, it was unprofessional and unfair." Her surprise softened into something else. "I didn't expect that. Most people wouldn't," he admitted. "But you deserve better." She tilted her head. That almost sounded human. Arthur chuckled softly. "Careful, you'll ruin my reputation." It was the first time she'd seen him laugh, not a polite smile, but something real. The sound caught her off guard, disarming in its warmth. Then the moment passed. "Finish your report," he said, returning to his calm tone. "Bring it to me by Friday." "Yes, Mr. Collins." He started to leave, then paused at the door. "Amara." She looked up. "You were right," he said. "That cafe does overcharge for croissants." She grinned despite herself. "I knew it." That night, Amara sat at her kitchen table, typing her report under the glow of a single lamp. Her apartment was small, barely more than a studio, but it was hers. The rain outside tapped against the window like a metronome, steady and familiar. Her phone buzzed with a message from Rachel. "Girl, rumor says the CEO personally assigned you a project. What kind of witchcraft did you use?" Amara smiled. "Hard work and accidental Uber rides," she replied. When she hit send, she realized her hands were trembling, not from fear, but from something else. Excitement, maybe. Curiosity. The sense that she'd stepped into a story larger than herself. In another part of the city, in a penthouse office still lit after midnight, Arthur Collins reread her personnel file. Her achievements, her references, her photograph. He wasn't sure what he was looking for: proof of her potential, or an explanation for why he couldn't stop thinking about her. At the bottom of the file, he noticed something small he hadn't before: a handwritten note from her former supervisor. "Amara Johnson has an unshakable sense of dignity, even when the world tries to take it from her." Arthur leaned back in his chair, staring at the rain outside his window. For the first time in a long time, he felt something unfamiliar: guilt, admiration, and a quiet, lingering question. What else haven't I been seeing? By Friday morning, Amara had memorized every creak of the 12th floor hallway, every stain on the carpet, every flickering light bulb she'd begged maintenance to replace. She'd finished her report, early 20 pages, detailed, color-coded, and proofread twice. It wasn't just work, it was armor. She arrived at the executive office, clutching her folder, trying to calm the storm in her chest. The receptionist, a tall woman with flawless hair and the kind of smile that felt more like a checkpoint, eyed her up and down. "Delivering something for Mr. Collins." "Yes," Amara said evenly. "His facilities report?" The woman took her time before replying. "Leave it on the side desk. He's in a meeting." Amara hesitated. "He asked me to hand it to him personally." That earned a raised eyebrow, one of those small gestures that said, "You must be mistaken." But Amara stood her ground. Before the receptionist could answer, Arthur's door opened. His voice carried easily down the corridor. "Miss Johnson, come in." The receptionist's polite mask faltered for just a second. Amara offered a small smile and stepped through the glass doors, heart thudding with satisfaction and nerves. Arthur's office looked like it belonged to someone allergic to imperfection. Minimalist furniture, floor-to-ceiling windows, and a single-framed photo of the Atlanta skyline at sunrise. He was standing near the window, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened. The morning light hit his face at an angle that made him look almost approachable. "Morning," he said without looking up from his laptop. "You're early." "Habit," she replied, setting the report on his desk. He flipped through the pages briefly. "You've been thorough. I try to be." "I noticed." He closed the folder, then looked at her. "How are you finding the environment so far?" She hesitated. "Efficient." His brow lifted. "That's a diplomatic answer." "It's a diplomatic building." He smiled faintly. "Touché. But I meant it honestly. You're settling in." Amara's instinct was to say yes, but something in his tone invited truth, not politeness. "I'm trying to," she said carefully, "but it's different." "Different how?" She hesitated, then decided she was tired of sugarcoating. When you walk into a place where no one looks like you start counting exits before introductions. Arthur didn't respond right away. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes softened, a realization maybe, or discomfort. "You shouldn't have to feel that way." "With respect, sir," she said quietly. "That's not up to me." For a moment neither spoke. The city hummed outside the glass, a distant echo of engines and rain. Arthur finally said, "Point taken." Then he tapped the report lightly. "This is excellent work. I want you to supervise the final inspection before the investors arrive." Amara blinked. "Me?" "Sir, that's unusual," he offered. "Yes, but I trust you'll handle it." She nodded, though she could already feel the whispers forming around her like static. By noon they arrived. The investors, mostly older white men in tailored suits, moved through the offices like they owned every inch of marble beneath their feet. Amara followed the group, clipboard in hand, explaining each feature of the renovated space. She caught fragments of their conversations as they trailed behind Arthur. "Interesting hire," one murmured, not quietly enough. "She's outspoken," said another. "New direction for Collins Media." "Huh?" Arthur's stride didn't falter, but Amara saw his jaw tighten. When the tour reached the lounge, one of the investors, a man with a gray mustache and a Harvard pin on his lapel, gestured at the coffee machine Amara had fixed earlier that week. "Ah, diversity in every sense," he said with a smirk, "even in maintenance." The others chuckled. It was the kind of joke meant to sound harmless, but it landed like a slap. Arthur opened his mouth, but Amara beat him to it. "Actually," she said evenly, "I'm part of the communications department. But I can make coffee too if that's what it takes to keep people awake through these presentations." The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut glass. Then, surprisingly, Arthur smiled, not mockingly, but with quiet pride. "Miss Johnson keeps this place running," he said, including its sense of humor. The investors laughed awkwardly, eager to move on. When the tour ended, Arthur dismissed the group and motioned for Amara to stay. She stood by the window, arms crossed, trying not to let the anger show. "You didn't have to respond," he said quietly. "If I didn't, it would have sounded like agreement." Arthur nodded slowly. "You're right." Amara glanced at him, surprised. "That's it. No lecture about professionalism." He shook his head. They were out of line. "And I should have said something sooner." For a moment the air between them shifted. The formality that usually guarded him seemed to falter. "Thank you," she said softly. He met her gaze and something passed between them, recognition, respect, maybe even something gentler. That evening, as most employees packed up to leave, Arthur was still in his office when Amara walked by. Her reflection caught in the glass again this time, sharper, steadier. She knocked lightly, "Leaving soon." He looked up from his screen. "Eventually." I'm heading out. Just wanted to say thanks for earlier." He closed his laptop. "You handled yourself better than most executives would have." Amara smiled faintly. "I've had practice. The world's not always subtle." He leaned back in his chair, thoughtful. "You ever wonder what it's like for someone who's never had to notice those things?" "All the time," she said. "That's what privilege is, isn't it? The luxury of not noticing." Arthur nodded, his expression unreadable. "Maybe it's time I start paying attention." As she turned to leave, he added, almost to himself, "You make it hard not to." Amara froze for a second, long enough for the weight of his words to settle, but didn't turn around. "Good," she said. "That's kind of the point." Outside, the rain had stopped. The city lights reflected on the wet pavement like gold veins running through darkness. Amara stood under the awning for a moment, breathing in the humid air before walking toward the bus stop. Somewhere above her in that glass tower, Arthur Collins watched the same city through a different lens. The faces, the stories, the silence. He was seeing it all for the first time. He didn't know it yet, but that day had changed more than just company optics. It had changed him. The following week, the building buzzed with nervous energy. The investor showcase had gone better than expected, but whispers still lingered about the incident, about the girl who talked back about how Arthur Collins had defended her. Amara could feel it everywhere she went, the sideways glances, the hushed tones that dropped when she entered a room. At first, she thought she was imagining it. But by the third day, she caught 2 co-workers in the break room lowering their voices the moment she walked in. "Do you think he's serious about her?" one whispered. "Please," the other said. "She's just a symbol. Once the press moves on, so will he." Amara pretended not to hear. She poured herself coffee and focused on the steam rising from the cup, willing herself not to react. She'd dealt with worse. Still, something about hearing it here in this glossy corporate temple of diversity cut deeper than she expected. When she returned to her desk, an email from Arthur was waiting. "My office, 10:00 a.m. Bring your notes on the investor follow-up." Her pulse spiked. She checked the clock 15 minutes. Enough time to fix her hair, straighten her jacket, and remind herself to be professional. Just business, she told herself. Always business. Arthur's office door was open when she arrived. He was standing beside the printer sleeves rolled up, frowning at a paper jam like it had personally offended him. "Good morning," Amara said carefully. He looked up, exasperated. How do people survive these machines? She couldn't help but smile. Experience, and occasionally a sacrifice to the paper gods. He stepped aside. "Be my guest." She crouched down, tugging at the jammed tray. "You really shouldn't go to war with technology, Mr. Collins. It doesn't end well. Consider it a trust exercise," he said dryly. Amara laughed. "You have a strange definition of trust." The paper tray gave way, suddenly releasing a puff of toner dust that landed squarely on her hands and sleeve. She stared at the mess. "And that's the price of victory." Arthur chuckled. "I'll add hazard pay to your file." She stood brushing off her blouse and caught him watching her, not in the detached way of a CEO analyzing an employee, but like he was trying to understand something about her, something beyond the resume, beyond the surface, what she asked. He blinked, startled out of thought. "Nothing, just wondering how you managed to turn chaos into calm." Amara tilted her head. "You mean how I stay composed?" "Yes." She smiled faintly. "You get used to it when the world's waiting for you to trip." The room went quiet. Arthur's expression softened. "You really believe everyone's waiting for that?" "Not everyone," she said. "Just enough to make you careful." He leaned against his desk, arms folded. "You shouldn't have to be careful all the time." She gave a small, tired laugh. "You sound like someone who's never had to be." That landed heavier than she intended. But Arthur didn't flinch. He just nodded slowly, eyes down. "You're right." The admission surprised her. Most men in his position would have deflected, justified, explained. He didn't. He simply owned it. They moved on to the meeting notes discussing investor feedback and press coverage. Arthur's tone shifted back to business, but the undercurrent between them remained subtle, magnetic, unspoken. When they finished, he said, "There's a networking event Friday night. Company attendance mandatory. I expect you'll be there." Amara hesitated. "Of course." "Good," he said. Then, almost as an afterthought, "And Amara." "Yes, you did well last week. Better than some of my senior managers." She smiled. "Thank you. You're welcome. Just don't start thinking you're invincible." "I wouldn't dare," she said, heading for the door. Then she paused. "But for the record, if you ever need a printer fixed again, I charge by the hour." Arthur smirked. Duly noted. That night, back in her apartment, Amara scrubbed the last traces of ink from her hands under warm running water. She watched the gray streaks swirl down the drain, but the conversation lingered in her mind. You shouldn't have to be careful all the time. It wasn't just what he said, it was how he said it. Like someone realizing maybe for the first time that the world didn't look the same from every window. She sat at her small kitchen table staring at the skyline through her rain-speckled window. The city lights glowed like constellations in motion. Somewhere out there, Arthur Collins was probably in his penthouse, surrounded by glass, and quiet, thinking about her words. A strange thought, comforting, dangerous, and real. The next day, she arrived early for once. The office was still half empty. As she passed by the glass conference room, she heard voices inside Arthur and two senior executives. She wouldn't have stopped if she hadn't heard her name. Amara Johnson, one of them said, tone-clipped. "Smart girl, but not boardroom material. You know how these diversity optics play out. People get the wrong impression." Arthur's reply came sharp and cold. The wrong impression being that competence doesn't have a color silence. Then a low chuckle. "You're sentimental, Arthur. Don't lose perspective." "I think perspective is exactly what we've been missing," he said. Amara stepped back, pulse racing. She didn't want to eavesdrop, but part of her couldn't move. When the meeting ended, the executives exited without acknowledging her. Arthur saw her standing there, frozen. His expression flickered surprise, then something gentler. "You heard." She nodded. "Some of it." He sighed. "I should have shut that down sooner." "You did," she said quietly. That's what mattered. For a second, neither of them spoke. The tension between them wasn't awkward anymore. It was something deeper, respect forged under pressure. Arthur finally said, "I'll see you at the event tomorrow." "Wouldn't miss it," she replied, "though I might hide near the dessert table." "That's where the best conversations happen," he said. "Exactly," she smiled, turning to leave. When she reached the elevator, she glanced down at her hands, clean now, but somehow still marked by the morning's work, by the words she'd overheard, by the realization that maybe she wasn't fighting alone anymore. She thought of all the battles that didn't leave scars, only ink wiped away too easily by people who'd never felt the weight of it. Arthur, she sensed, wasn't one of those people anymore, and though she'd never admit it out loud, she felt it a quiet shift. He wasn't just her boss now, he was listening. The ballroom glimmered like a postcard version of success. Gold-trimmed banners hung above the crowd glasses, clinked, and conversations hummed with the hollow rhythm of networking. It was the annual Stonebridge Media Summit part, business part, spectacle, and for the first time, Amara had a seat at the table. Technically, it was a standing table near the back, but still she was there. Rachel found her balancing two champagne flutes. "Survival kit," she said, handing one over. "Drink fast before the speeches start." Amara laughed softly. "Are they that bad?" "Worse. It's like listening to people clap for themselves for 2 hours." Rachel's voice dropped. "The CEO's here, and he looks, well, like a man about to give a headline speech." Amara's eyes followed her gaze. Arthur Collins stood near the stage, gray suit, immaculate posture, effortless. Cameras flashed, reporters hovered, investors circled. His face was calm, practiced the picture of corporate perfection. And yet, when his eyes found hers across the room, something subtle flickered. Recognition. Relief. Before she could return the look, a man with a press badge appeared at her side. "Excuse me," he said briskly. "You work for Stonebridge, right?" Yes, communication support." "Perfect," he said already, gesturing toward a camera operator behind him. "Quick statement for our coverage. Just a few words about company culture." Amara froze. I'm not authorized to just an internal segment," he cut in smoothly. "Promise nothing heavy. Name and position, then a few words about your experience here." She hesitated, but the camera light blinked red before she could finish saying no. "My name's Amara Johnson," she began cautiously. "I work in communications." "And what's it like?" the reporter asked, being part of Stonebridge Media under new leadership. Her mind blanked. She could have said something safe. "It's inspiring. It's challenging. It's great." But she didn't. Instead, she heard herself say, "It's complicated." The reporter blinked. Complicated how Amara swallowed. The truth rose uninvited, carried by months of quiet restraint. Stonebridge is changing. But change isn't easy. Sometimes it means walking into rooms where no one expects to see you. Sometimes it means smiling through the kind of silence that says you don't belong. But you show up anyway. You do the work anyway. Because belonging isn't granted, it's built. For a beat, no one moved. Even the reporter seemed caught off guard. "That's powerful," he said finally. "Thank you." And just like that, he was gone. Rachel stared at her wide-eyed. "Girl, that was not the corporate-approved response." Amara pressed a hand to her forehead. "I know. I just spoke truth to power." Rachel finished. "Congratulations. You're either getting promoted or exiled to the basement." They both laughed, but beneath the humor, Amara's stomach twisted. She'd said too much. And in this world, too much truth had consequences. By Monday morning, she didn't need anyone to tell her. She could feel it the moment she entered the building. Heads turned. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Rachel met her at her desk, tablet in hand. "You need to see this." Amara's heart sank. On the screen was a thumbnail of her face, frozen mid-sentence under the headline, "Belonging isn't granted, it's built." Employees' words. Spark viral debate on diversity in media. She skimmed the comments, thousands of them. Finally, someone said it. "Brave woman. Respect. Just playing the race card for attention. Why do they always have to make it about color?" Her chest tightened. It went public. Rachel nodded grimly. "Nationally. Someone from the press cut your clip and posted it. It's everywhere now. LinkedIn, Twitter, morning talk shows." Amara sank into her chair. "I'm dead." "You're trending," Rachel corrected, which in corporate language means the higher-ups are already in panic mode. As if on cue, her phone rang. "Incoming call, Arthur Collins." She stared at it. "Here lies my career." Rachel crossed her fingers. "Good luck, legend." Amara took a breath and answered. "Mr. Collins." "My office," he said simply. "Now." The silence between them in the elevator felt like its own kind of judgment. When she stepped into Arthur's office, the door closed with an almost ceremonial click. He was standing near the window again, the city skyline a wall of silver behind him. On his desk, a tablet replayed her clip on loop. Her own voice filled the air. "Belonging isn't granted, it's built." Amara swallowed hard. "Sir, I didn't mean for it to." He raised a hand. "Sit." She obeyed, her pulse pounding. Arthur played the clip once more, then paused it. For a moment, the only sound was the hum of the air conditioner. Finally, he said, "You understand what this means, right?" "Yes," she said quietly. "That I embarrassed the company." He looked at her eyes, unreadable. "No, that you reminded it what it's supposed to stand for." Her head snapped up. "What?" He exhaled, leaning back against his desk. "You think I don't know what this place looks like from the outside? The board is furious, but the public reaction, Amara, people are praising us for authenticity. For once, we look human." Amara blinked. "So, I'm not fired." He almost laughed. "You're the best PR accident we've ever had." She exhaled relief, flooding her. "That's not how I expected this conversation to go." "Neither did I," he admitted, a hint of warmth touching his voice. "You spoke truth, and truth travels fast. Don't ever apologize for that." Amara studied him for a moment. "You know this changes things." He nodded. "Yes, For both of us. There was a quiet pause long enough for the hum of rain to fill the space again. Then Arthur said, "The world saw courage. I saw someone I've underestimated." Amara looked down, hiding a smile. "So, what now?" He smiled faintly. "Now we make sure your truth doesn't get lost in the noise. You're joining the Internal Diversity Council, effective immediately." She blinked. "Is that even a thing?" "It is now," he said. For the first time since she'd walked into Stonebridge Media, Amara felt something shift inside her, a sense of belonging, not handed down, but earned. That night, as she left the building, the city lights seemed softer, warmer. Her reflection in the glass doors no longer looked like an intruder. Arthur watched from his office window, phone in hand, watching the video again, her words, her composure, the quiet fire in her voice. He realized then that truth once spoken aloud couldn't be contained, and that maybe, just maybe, he didn't want it to be. The storm hit before sunrise, not outside, but inside Stonebridge Media. By 8:00 a.m., the top floor was a battlefield of murmured outrage, flashing headlines and executives with too much caffeine and too little patience. Amara could hear it from her desk, the clipped voices, the sharp heels on marble floors, the unmistakable tension that comes when power feels threatened. Her clip had reached 1 million views overnight. Every outlet from Forbes to BuzzTalk had picked it up. The company's PR inbox was drowning in messages, some praising her, some tearing her apart. Rachel leaned against the cubicle wall, whispering like they were in a spy movie. "Word is, the board's demanding a meeting. Damage control." "Damage control?" Amara asked quietly. For telling the truth, Rachel gave her a sympathetic look. "You know how they see it. Truth's only good PR when they can package it first." At 9:00 sharp, Arthur called her into the boardroom. The room was all glass and tension. 12 people sat around the table, 11 men and 1 woman. Their suits looked expensive enough to fund a scholarship. The moment Amara entered, conversation stopped. Miss Johnson said one of the directors, a man whose silver cufflinks gleamed like medals. "We've all seen the video." "Yes, sir," she said calmly. He leaned forward. "You understand the consequences of what you said." Amara held her ground. "I spoke honestly about my experience here, which is commendable," another voice cut in, "but also reckless. We're not a social movement, we're a media corporation." Arthur sat at the head of the table, expression unreadable. His gaze stayed on Amara, silent but steady. He wasn't interrupting them, not yet. The first director continued, "You've painted a picture of exclusion. That damages our reputation." With respect, Amara said, her voice low but firm. "If the picture feels uncomfortable, maybe it's because it's accurate." A few gasps rippled through the room. The director's jaw tightened. "This isn't about comfort, Miss Johnson. It's about control." Arthur finally spoke. "Control is meaningless if it hides rot underneath." All heads turned to him. The director frowned. "Arthur, we can't let one employee dictate the company's public narrative." Arthur met his gaze coolly. "She didn't dictate anything. She told the truth. And the public believed her more than they believe us. That should tell you something." The room went quiet. For a few seconds, the air was thick enough to choke on. Finally, the only woman on the board, a middle-aged executive with steel-gray eyes, spoke up. "She's right," she said, nodding toward Amara. "And so is Arthur. If we're going to talk about diversity, we need to start living it, not staging it." It was the first moment Amara felt she wasn't completely alone. After the meeting, Arthur motioned for Amara to follow him into his office. He shut the door behind them, the noise of corporate panic fading into silence. "Are you okay?" he asked quietly. Amara let out a shaky laugh. "Define okay." "I just told a board of millionaires their system's broken." Arthur gave a half smile. "That might be the bravest thing I've ever seen. Or the dumbest," she said, sinking into a chair. "I still have a job, right?" "For now," he said, and her heart skipped. "But listen, whatever happens, I want you to know something." She looked up. His voice had softened. "You made me see things I should have seen long ago. The way people look at you when you speak. The way they don't look at you when you walk into a room. I've been blind to it." Amara studied him. "That's not blindness, Mr. Collins. That's comfort." He exhaled. "You're right again." She leaned back, exhaustion and adrenaline mingling in her chest. So what now? The company rebrands as Woke for a week and moves on. Arthur shook his head. No, I'm not letting that happen. If they want diversity, we'll make it real. Starting with you. Her brows furrowed. Meaning you're being promoted to Senior Communications Associate, he said. You'll help me rewrite our internal policy on representation. She blinked. That's a big move. Good, he said. You've already rewritten the narrative out there. Let's make sure the one inside matches. Amara hesitated. People will think you're only doing this because of the video. Arthur's tone was calm, but final. Then we'll prove them wrong. For the next week, she worked closely with him, late nights, endless drafts, heated discussions about hiring practices and fair pay. What started as a PR cleanup turned into something else: accountability. They argued, laughed, disagreed, learned. Arthur discovered how much he'd been insulated by privilege. Amara discovered that not all allies wore slogans. Some built bridges quietly, piece by piece. One night, around 10 p.m., the office was empty, except for the two of them. The city lights below cast fractured reflections across the glass table where they sat reviewing edits. You know, Arthur said, rubbing his temples, you've made me realize how much I still have to learn. Welcome to the club, Amara said, smiling. We meet every day and still never graduate. He chuckled. I used to think leadership meant certainty. Now I think it's the opposite, knowing you're still learning. Maybe that's the start of real leadership, she said softly. Their eyes met. The room felt smaller, quieter. For a moment there was no boardroom, no viral video, no power hierarchy, just two people trying to understand the same world from different corners of it. Arthur broke the silence first. You're extraordinary, Amara. She blinked, caught off guard. I'm just trying to survive. He smiled faintly. Maybe that's what extraordinary looks like. The moment hung in the air, dangerous, fragile, human. Later, when she left the office, the rain had returned. Atlanta shimmered under streetlights, alive and restless. Amara walked slowly, her reflection rippling across puddles. She knew this calm wouldn't last. The storm wasn't over, it had only changed shape. There would be more pushback, more politics, more headlines. But for the first time, she wasn't scared of them. Inside the tower behind her, Arthur watched from his office window again, the same way he had on the first day she walked into his car. Back then, he'd seen her as a mistake. Now he saw her as a mirror, and for the first time in his career, he wasn't afraid of what it showed him. The invitation arrived on heavy cream paper, embossed with gold lettering, Annual Investor Dinner, hosted by Arthur Collins Stonebridge Media. Rachel read it over Amara's shoulder, eyebrows raised. Fancy. Guess who's moving up in the world? Amara sighed. Guess who doesn't want to be on display like a museum exhibit? Rachel nudged her. You know what this is, right? Optics. They want you there to show how progressive the company's become. Smile, shake hands, look diverse. Amara folded the card carefully. Then I'll go and make sure they see more than what they expect. The restaurant glittered with wealth, the kind that didn't try to hide itself. Crystal chandeliers floated like stars above the tables. Soft jazz drifted through the air, and the waiters moved in synchronized silence. Amara stepped inside wearing a dark emerald dress, simple but sharp. Heads turned as she walked past some curious, some calculating. Arthur was waiting near the entrance, perfectly composed in a charcoal suit. When he saw her, something unspoken flickered across his face, admiration mixed with relief. You're early, he said. I like to see the battlefield before the war starts, she replied. He smiled faintly. You might need that instinct tonight. Before she could ask why, a voice interrupted a smooth, deep drawl with just enough arrogance to fill the room. Arthur Collins, it said, always hosting the best shows in town. A man in his late 50s approached, tan-skinned silver hair and a smile that didn't touch his eyes. Amara recognized him instantly. Richard Thorne, an influential investor known for his fortune and his unfiltered opinions. He extended a hand toward Arthur, then turned to her. And who do we have here? Arthur's tone was measured. Amara Johnson, Senior Communications Associate. She's been leading our new equity initiatives. Thorne chuckled. Ah, the face of progress. Every company's got one these days. The words stung not for their sharpness, but for their casual ease. Amara met his gaze calmly. "It's not just my face, Mr. Thorne. It's my work." "Of course," he said, clearly amused. "Arthur, you always were a visionary, bringing in a little color to the boardroom." Arthur's jaw tightened. "We brought her in because she's qualified." Thorne smirked. "Naturally. And I'm sure she's charming, too." Amara smiled thinly. "Don't worry, I can multitask." The table fell silent for half a second. Then from somewhere down the row, a nervous laugh broke the tension. Arthur's eyes flicked toward her, a quiet acknowledgement approval, maybe even gratitude. Dinner unfolded like a well-rehearsed play. Toast's laughter, polite lies. But beneath the surface, the tension hummed. Every question directed at Amara felt loaded. Every compliment carried a quiet but still. "So, Miss Johnson," one investor asked, swirling his wine, "do you think all this talk of inclusion really changes anything?" Amara set down her glass. "It does when the people in charge actually listen." He smiled condescendingly. "And do you think they are?" She looked at Arthur. "Some of them are learning." Arthur held her gaze for a moment, then turned back to the table. "And some of us are still listening." The man chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "Touché." Halfway through the meal, Thorne leaned closer to Arthur, voice low, but not low enough. "You're doing good PR work, I'll give you that. Keeps the media happy. But careful, my friend, don't let your empathy cost you your investors." Arthur's reply was steady. "Empathy's never a cost." Thorne grinned. "Says the man who can afford it." That landed like a slap. Amara's fork froze halfway to her plate. She caught Arthur's jaw tighten the controlled restraint of someone used to swallowing outrage for diplomacy. But she wasn't built for silence. "With all due respect, Mr. Thorne," she said, "the only people who can afford empathy are the ones who never have to ask for it." Thorne turned surprised by the edge in her voice. "Well, I suppose you'd know, wouldn't you?" "I do," she said evenly, "because I've lived in a world built by people who confuse empathy with charity." A hush fell over the table. Glasses paused midair. Arthur leaned forward slightly, his eyes fixed on her, not in warning, but in quiet awe. Thorne gave a dismissive chuckle. "You've got spirit, Miss Johnson. That's rare these days." "Not rare," she said, "just often ignored." When dessert arrived, the air had cooled. Thorne redirected his charm toward safer topics, but his smirk lingered. As the waiters cleared the plates, Arthur stood to give a short closing speech. He thanked the investors for their trust, the staff for their hard work, and then unexpectedly he said, "And to Amara Johnson, whose courage reminds this company what integrity looks like." All heads turned. Amara froze. Arthur met her eyes steady and unflinching. "Progress," he continued, "isn't about press releases. It's about accountability. And if that makes some people uncomfortable, good. Discomfort means we're changing." Applause spread slowly, unevenly, but it came. Some clapped because they meant it, others because it was safer than not. Thorne raised his glass. "To courage, then," he said with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. Amara smiled faintly. "To honesty," she replied. "May we learn to tell the difference." After the dinner, as guests filtered out, Arthur walked her to the curb. The night air was cool. The city lights reflected in puddles like shards of gold. "You didn't have to defend me," she said. "I didn't," he replied. "You defended yourself better than I ever could." She studied him. "You realize what tonight cost you, right?" He nodded. "Some allies, a few investors, maybe even a promotion from the board. And you're okay with that?" For the first time he said quietly, "Yeah, I am." They stood in silence, the street humming with passing cars and distant thunder. Finally he said, "You shouldn't have to fight like that alone." Amara's smile was tired but sincere. "Then don't just stand beside me in rooms like that. Stand beside me when no one's watching." Arthur nodded slowly. "Deal." As she rode home that night, the city looked different, not brighter or softer, just real. Her heart was still pounding, her mind replaying every word she'd said, every glance exchanged. It wasn't about the dinner anymore. It wasn't even about Arthur. It was about claiming space in a room that was never built for her and refusing to apologize for taking it. And somewhere deep down, she knew the next fight would be harder. But she was ready. The next morning, the world looked almost too normal. Emails, deadlines, coffee stains, life at Stonebridge moved as if nothing monumental had happened the night before. But Amara felt it. So did everyone else. Some greeted her with hesitant smiles, others avoided her entirely. The news had spread fast at the investor dinner she had publicly challenged Richard Thorne, and Arthur Collins had backed her up. Rachel cornered her by the elevators. "You know you just became a legend, right?" Amara sighed. "I'd rather be anonymous." "Too late. Half the staff's calling you the woman who made Thorne blink. That man hasn't been contradicted since the Bush administration." Amara tried to laugh, but her stomach still carried the weight of last night. Standing up to power always felt heroic in the moment, but in the aftermath, it just felt heavy. Arthur's office door was closed that morning, something that rarely happened. Through the glass, Amara could see him standing by the window phone pressed to his ear. His posture was rigid, his voice low, deliberate. When he finally emerged, he gestured for her to follow. "Walk with me," he said. They took the back corridor, the one with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Atlanta. Sunlight poured in, cutting golden paths across the carpet. "Thorne's pulling his funding," Arthur said finally. Amara stopped walking. "Because of last night? Yes, and 2 others might follow. They're claiming I've let ideology cloud leadership." She felt a pang of guilt. "Arthur, I didn't mean for—" "Don't," he said gently. "You didn't cause this. They did. I just gave them an excuse to show their true colors." They walked in silence for a moment, the hum of the city faint below them. "Doesn't this put you at risk?" she asked quietly. "Maybe, but I'd rather lose investors than integrity." Amara studied him. The controlled precision she'd first seen in him was still there, but beneath it was something rawer, more human. "You really mean that?" Arthur turned toward her. "I used to think progress was a marketing strategy. You showed me it's a responsibility." She looked down, unsure what to do with the warmth rising in her chest. "I just spoke what I knew, and I listened," he said. "That's the least I could do." Later that afternoon, an unexpected message arrived. "Arthur Collins requests your presence, 6:30 p.m., 27th floor conference room." Rachel peeked over Amara's shoulder. "After-hours meeting with the CEO. That's either really good or really, really bad." Amara closed the email. "I guess I'll find out." The 27th floor conference room was dark when she arrived, except for the city lights spilling through the windows. The skyline glowed like a map of constellations. Arthur stood at the far end of the room, jacket off, sleeves rolled to his elbows, looking out at the city as if it were both beautiful and unbearable. He didn't turn when she entered. "Do you ever wonder," he said, "how people like us end up in rooms like these?" She hesitated. "People like us?" He faced her then. "You who had to fight for every inch of space. Me, who inherited rooms already waiting for me. We live in the same city, the same world, but we got here by very different roads." Amara crossed her arms gently. "And now those roads meet," Arthur nodded. "And I keep asking myself whether I deserve to stand on yours." The honesty in his voice disarmed her. "You're not the villain here, Arthur." "Maybe not, but I've benefited from people who were." That silence again, thick with truth, uncomfortable but necessary. Amara walked closer, her reflection overlapping his in the window. "You can't change what built you, but you can decide what you build next." He turned to her fully. "I want to build something real, Amara. Not just for optics. For people who feel like you did, like the room was never theirs." Her heart stuttered. "And what about you? What about me? You keep talking about fixing systems, changing culture. But where does Arthur Collins fit in that world?" He gave a faint smile. "Maybe for once he doesn't have to be at the center of it." Amara studied him, her voice softening. "That's not how change works. You don't erase yourself. You evolve." He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "You always know what to say." "No," she said. "I just stopped being afraid to say it." They stood side by side, watching the city breathe below them. Neither spoke for a long time. The tension between them wasn't sharp anymore. It was steady, charged with something that wasn't quite professional, wasn't quite romantic, but lived somewhere in between. Finally, Arthur broke the silence. "You know I used to think silence was power, and now I think it's cowardice." Amara turned to him. "You're learning fast. I have a good teacher." He smiled, and for a moment the weight of the day seemed to lift. But underneath it lingered something else, a question neither of them dared to voice. When she finally spoke, her tone was softer than she intended. "You didn't call me up here to talk about Thorn, did you?" Arthur looked at her for a long moment, then said, "No. I wanted to thank you." "For what?" "For making me uncomfortable." She raised an eyebrow. "That's an odd way to say you're welcome." He chuckled. "You make me see things I'd rather ignore, and somehow I don't resent you for it." Amara smiled faintly. "That's because I don't tell you what you want to hear. I tell you what you need to." Arthur's gaze lingered on her, steady and unreadable. "You have no idea how rare that is." Their eyes met, and for a heartbeat too long neither looked away. Then Amara stepped back, grounding herself. "I should go. I still have reports to file." He nodded, though disappointment flickered in his eyes. "Of course." At the door she paused. "Arthur?" "Yes." "You don't have to deserve change to start it." He smiled, quiet and genuine. "And you don't have to apologize for causing it." When she left the building, the night air was warm, heavy with the scent of rain and streetlight haze. She walked to the corner, her reflection catching briefly in every dark window she passed. For the first time, she didn't feel like a mistake in someone else's story. She felt like the author of her own. And somewhere behind her, in the glow of the 27th floor, Arthur Collins stood at the window, watching her disappear into the night, the woman who had challenged him, changed him, and without meaning to, quietly claimed a piece of his heart. The following week unfolded like a strange dream, quiet, weightless, but not peaceful. Stonebridge media was calmer on the surface. The press had moved on to fresher scandals, the boardroom fires had cooled, and investors were back to pretending nothing had ever cracked the company's polished facade. But between Amara and Arthur, something had cracked, and neither of them knew how to fix it. It started small, a shorter email here, a missed glance there. The hallway nods that used to linger turned into polite acknowledgments. If anyone else noticed, they didn't say a word. But Rachel did. "You two haven't talked in, 4 days?" she whispered over lunch. 5. Amara corrected, staring into her coffee. "Did something happen?" "Nothing happened," Amara said too fast, then quieter. "And maybe that's the problem." Rachel sighed. "Girls' silence can be louder than shouting. You taught me that." The silence stretched through the next week. Arthur avoided the common floors, burying himself in closed-door meetings. When they passed each other in the hallway, his "Good morning, Miss Johnson" was crisp, formal, distant, as if he'd built a wall out of politeness, and was determined to stay behind it. Amara tried to focus on work. She told herself it was better this way, less complicated, more professional. But her chest ached in that quiet, stubborn way that had nothing to do with logic. One night she stayed late alone under the hum of fluorescent lights editing a proposal draft. Her reflection stared back at her in the dark window. Tired eyes, tense jaw. She didn't hear him approach until his voice broke the stillness, burning the midnight oil. Her pulse jumped. She turned, trying not to show it. "Someone has to make sure the reports make sense before they reach your desk." Arthur leaned on the doorframe. His suit jacket was off, sleeves rolled. There were faint shadows under his eyes. "You always do more than what's asked. That's how you survive in this place." He smiled faintly. "You make it sound like a battlefield." "It is," she said quietly. "Just without uniforms." For a moment the air between them filled with everything unsaid. The gratitude, the admiration, the ache of distance. Arthur stepped into the room. "Amara, about the other night." She cut him off. "You don't owe me an explanation." "Maybe not, but you deserve one anyway." She sighed, closing the laptop. "You don't have to protect me, Arthur. I can handle silence. I've lived with it my whole life." "It's not you I'm protecting," he said. "It's us." Her heart clenched. "Us." He nodded slowly. "Whatever this is, whatever we've become, it's dangerous." The more visible we are, the easier it is for people to twist it. They'll say, "You're here because of me, that your success isn't yours." Her voice trembled, not with fear, but anger. So what we pretend we don't know each other, that all the work we did doesn't matter because people might talk. He looked away. They won't just talk, Amara. They'll destroy you to reach me, and you'd let them. His silence was answer enough. The next morning, her desk felt colder somehow. No more surprise calls from his office. No late-night emails asking for her opinion. Her name disappeared from meeting invitations that used to include her by default. Rachel noticed immediately. "Okay, I'm just going to say it. What's going on?" "Professional boundaries," Amara said, typing without looking up. "Boundaries or punishment?" "Both, maybe." Rachel frowned. "He's scared. So am I," Amara admitted. But fears never built anything worth keeping. By Friday, she couldn't take it anymore. She stood outside his office, knuckles hovering near the door. Her reflection in the glass looked steadier than she felt. "Come in," his voice said. Arthur was behind his desk, surrounded by files, the picture of calm efficiency. He didn't look up right away. When he did, his eyes flickered with something regret before the mask returned. "Miss Johnson," he said, formal again. "You have the department reports. I didn't come for that," she said. He froze. "Then why?" "Because I'm tired of pretending this distance makes sense." He leaned back, folding his hands carefully. "Amara." "No," she interrupted. "You told me to speak truth. So here it is. You're not protecting me. You're protecting yourself from what people might say, from what you might feel. And maybe that's your right. But don't call it noble." His expression tightened. "You think I haven't tried to stop this? Every time I see you, I forget how to be the man they expect me to be. That's not leadership, it's weakness." Amara took a step forward, her voice shaking but firm. "Then stop mistaking humanity for weakness." The silence after that was heavy enough to crush them both. Finally, Arthur spoke, voice barely above a whisper. "If I let this continue, I'll lose everything I've built." "And if you don't?" she asked. He looked at her, then really looked at her, and the answer was written all over his face. He'd lose her. Amara turned to leave. Her fingers brushed the doorknob before she stopped. "You know," she said softly, "you taught me something." Arthur's voice was rough. "What's that?" "That silence isn't always peace. Sometimes it's just surrender." Then she walked out. He didn't stop her. Not because he didn't want to, but because he couldn't. When the door closed, the office felt emptier than it ever had. That night, Amara rode the bus home in the quiet hum of rain. Her phone buzzed an unread message from Arthur. "I'm sorry. I thought distance would protect us. I see now it only destroyed what was real." She stared at the words, fingers hovering over the keyboard. Then slowly she typed, "Real things don't break, Arthur. They bend until someone decides to stop holding on." She didn't hit send. Instead, she closed her eyes, letting the city lights blur through the window. The bus rolled past the same street corner where months ago she had stepped into the wrong car. Back then it had felt like a mistake. Now it felt like fate with a cruel sense of humor. And somewhere across town, Arthur sat alone in his office staring at his phone, the unsent echo of what might have been burning in both their screens miles apart, but tethered by the same silence. For the first time since she'd entered his life, he didn't know what to do next. A week passed, then another. The silence between Amara and Arthur had hardened into something tangible, like frost on glass, beautiful from afar, but impossible to touch without shattering. The office moved on. New projects, new campaigns, the same relentless rhythm. But for Amara, every click of her keyboard felt heavier. Every floor meeting, a reminder of the space where his voice used to fit. She didn't delete his messages. She just stopped answering them. She told herself it was discipline boundaries. But late at night, when her apartment was quiet and her coffee had gone cold, she'd scroll through their old emails, clipped exchanges about reports, late-night jokes about croissants, fragments of a friendship that had meant more than either of them had planned. She couldn't let go of what they had because he hadn't said goodbye. Arthur Collins was not a man built for regret. He'd spent his life turning discomfort into progress, loss into lessons. But this This silence felt like punishment. His office remained immaculate, but his mind wasn't. Every time someone mentioned Amara's name in a meeting, his attention slipped. Every report she sent was too precise, too professional. It was her way of building walls without ever slamming doors. One night, long after everyone had left, he opened his desk drawer to find a note he'd written, but never delivered. It wasn't long, just a single page. He'd written it the day after she walked out of his office. Amara, if I seem distant, it's not because I don't care. It's because I care too much. You've changed me in ways I can't explain to a boardroom or to myself. You made me see what I'd become, and for the first time in years, I didn't like the reflection. I'm not proud of my fear, but I can't let you drown in the noise of my world. You deserve better than shadows. You deserve light. AC. He stared at the signature for a long time. He never sent it because it felt like cowardice wrapped in eloquence. But now, reading it again, he wondered if silence had been worse. Amara's days became a cycle of function and avoidance. She showed up early, left, late, kept her work flawless. The walls she built out of professionalism were admired by everyone and understood by no one, except Rachel. You look fine, but you sound broken, Rachel said one morning, setting a coffee on her desk. Want to talk about it? Amara forced a smile. There's nothing to talk about. Then why do you look like you're writing invisible letters in your head every 5 minutes? Amara's throat tightened. Because I am. Rachel studied her. He hurt you. Amara shook her head. No, he just stopped showing up. Rachel exhaled softly. Then maybe you need to show up for yourself again. That evening, Amara stayed late again, as if the hum of the empty office could muffle her thoughts. Around 10:30 p.m., she noticed something on her desk, a small envelope cream-colored with her name written in careful handwriting. No one else was around. Her pulse quickened. She opened it slowly. Amara, I don't know how to make peace with the distance I created. Every decision I made was meant to protect you, but I see now it only isolated us. You said silence wasn't peace, it was surrender. You were right. I'm tired of surrendering. There's a meeting tomorrow at 8 a.m. It's about restructuring leadership roles. If I fail that vote, I'll probably lose everything I built here. But I can't keep building something that exists on pretense and fear. Not anymore. You once told me real things don't break, they bend. I hope that's true. Arthur. She read it twice, then a third time, as if the ink might change meaning with every pass. Her chest tightened with something that wasn't quite hope, but wasn't despair either, just raw, trembling humanity. She placed the letter back in the envelope and slid it into her bag. The next morning, the boardroom was filled before sunrise. Executives in dark suits, consultants, advisors. It felt like a tribunal more than a meeting. Amara wasn't supposed to be there, but she came anyway, sitting quietly in the back, her ID badge half hidden. Arthur stood at the head of the table, shoulders, straight face, unreadable. But when his eyes met hers across the room, just for a second, the tension in his posture eased. He began. For the past year, we've built our image on innovation and inclusivity, he said. But if that inclusivity only exists when it's convenient, it's not real. One of the board members interrupted sharply. Arthur, this isn't a social crusade. No, he said, voice calm but sharp as glass. It's a reality check. You can't build progress by silencing the people who speak truth. You can't lead by fear. Amara's breath caught. Every word sounded like an echo of their last conversation, her words reborn in his voice. The debate grew heated. Numbers, profits, projections. Arthur held his ground. He didn't win every argument, but he didn't retreat either. By the time the vote concluded, it was clear he'd kept his position, but barely. The price was visible in his eyes. When he walked past her afterward, he didn't say a word. Just a faint nod, a silent promise. It's not over. That night, Amara returned home to find another envelope under her door. The same handwriting. Inside, just 2 lines. I'm still here. And so is what you started. She sat on the floor reading it under the soft light of her lamp. Her hands trembled, smudging the edge of the ink. Then she took out a blank sheet of paper and finally wrote back, not a letter of love or apology, but of truth. Arthur, if what we started still matters, prove it. Don't let your words die in drawers. Build something that outlives both of us. Make this place worth the pain it took to change it. And when it's done, maybe then we'll stop writing letters we're too afraid to send. Amara. She folded it neatly and placed it in her nightstand beside his first note, the one she'd never known how to answer. Outside, the rain had started again, soft and relentless. And somewhere high above the sleeping city, 2 lights still burned, one in her apartment, one in his office, proof that some silences don't mean endings. Sometimes they mean the space before the next beginning. By the time spring returned to Atlanta, the world outside Stonebridge Media was changing, and so was the one inside. What began as a whisper, an employee here, a conversation there, had grown into something larger. Amara's words, the video, the dinner, the letters, they'd become stories that refused to die, and she'd stopped running from them. When HR quietly asked her to lead an internal mentorship program for underrepresented voices, she agreed on one condition. "It's not a diversity initiative," she said flatly. "It's an accountability program. We're not teaching people to fit in. We're showing this company how to make room." To her surprise, Arthur approved it without edits. He didn't try to lead it. He didn't even attend the first meeting. He just sent a short message before it began. "Change isn't led. It's handed over." The first session was awkward. 10 employees gathered in a conference room that smelled faintly of burnt coffee and fear. Some were interns, others managers who'd quietly hit invisible ceilings. They didn't know what to expect, and neither did she. Amara stood by the whiteboard marker in hand, palms sweating. "This isn't about speeches," she said. "It's about stories, real ones. Who wants to start silence?" Then a young woman with short locks spoke up. "I almost quit last year," she said softly. "Someone told me I only got hired because of quotas. I believed them." Amara's throat tightened. "And you stayed?" The woman nodded. "Because someone like you said I belonged here." The room shifted. The wall between fear and honesty cracked open just a little. Others began to speak, quiet voices at first, then stronger ones. Stories about being overlooked, interrupted, underestimated. Stories about invisible walls disguised as professionalism. Amara didn't realize she was crying until one of the interns passed her a tissue. By the end of the meeting, they weren't employees anymore, they were witnesses. When everyone left, she stood in the empty room for a long while, the air still thick with something sacred. It wasn't victory, it was truth. Later that week, Arthur called her into his office. He was standing near the window again, always the window looking down at the city that never seemed to stop moving. "I heard the first session went well," he said. She nodded. "Better than I expected. People are talking. Good kind of talking, or the dangerous kind." He smiled faintly. "At Stonebridge, they're often the same." She folded her arms. "And what about you? What's the board saying, that I've turned the company into a social experiment? And are they wrong?" He looked at her eyes steady. "No, and I'm okay with that." For a moment, neither spoke. Then Arthur stepped closer. "You were right, you know." "About what?" "About silence." He took a breath. "It doesn't protect. It decays. It's easy to maintain patterns when no one challenges them. You broke mine." Amara smiled faintly. "And you didn't fire me for it. That's progress." He laughed, a sound warmer than she'd heard in weeks. "Progress hurts." "So does staying the same," she said. He nodded slowly as if memorizing her words, but not everyone shared their conviction. 2 weeks later, Amara received an anonymous email. "Be careful. Some of us liked it better before you started fixing things." No signature, no context, just a threat wrapped in nostalgia. She stared at the screen for a long time. Fear whispered at the back of her mind, "You've pushed too far." But another voice, stronger this time, said, "Then keep pushing." She forwarded the email to Arthur with a single line, "Proof that we're making progress." His reply came instantly, "You're not alone in this, ever." The following Monday, Arthur surprised everyone. At the all-staff meeting, he took the stage eyes scanning the crowded auditorium. "When I took over this company," he began, "I thought leadership meant having all the answers. But recently I've learned it starts with listening." He paused, glancing toward Amara. A few months ago, one of our own said something that changed me. She said belonging isn't granted, it's built. She was right, and it's time we start building. He clicked the remote and the screen behind him filled with words. The Stonebridge Pledge. Real voices, real rooms, real change. A murmur ran through the audience. Arthur continued, "This isn't branding. This is restructuring. From today forward, we'll publish diversity data, quarterly audit, pay equity," and he looked toward Amara again, "expand mentorship under Amara Johnson's direction." The applause started hesitant, then swelled. Amara sat frozen, heart-pounding. She hadn't expected this not public recognition, not this level of trust. When the meeting ended, she caught up to him in the hallway. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes," he said quietly. "I did. You broke the pattern. It's my job not to let it rebuild." That evening, she walked home under a soft drizzle, the streets shimmering in gold reflections. Her phone buzzed an email from an unfamiliar address. "Thank you for speaking. I didn't think anyone noticed people like me. Now I do." Amara smiled. She didn't reply. She didn't have to. At her apartment, she placed Arthur's old letters in a small box on her shelf. They weren't love notes. They were timestamps, evidence of how far both had come. She ran her fingers over the paper edges, thinking of all the people who would never know these words existed, but would still live in their ripple. Her phone buzzed again. A new message from Arthur. "Dinner tomorrow not for business, for breathing." She stared at it for a long moment, a smile tugging at her lips. "As long as it's not at the same restaurant as last time." "Deal," he replied. The next day they met at a small jazz bar tucked between two bookshops. The music was soft, the lighting forgiving. No cameras, no investors, just them. Arthur raised his glass. "To breaking patterns," he said. Amara clinked hers gently against his, "and building better ones." For the first time in months, they didn't talk about work or the board or change. They talked about music, about childhood, about the strange quiet that comes after chaos. When they stepped outside, the air smelled like rain and magnolia. Arthur hesitated, then said softly, "You were right again." "About what?" "That real things don't break. They bend." She smiled, meeting his gaze. "Then let's make sure we don't snap." He nodded. "Not this time." They stood there for a long moment, the city pulsing around them, both knowing that change, real change, was never neat or easy. But it was theirs now. And for once, that was enough. The hotel ballroom smelled like new, carpet-expensive perfume and nerves. It was the Southeastern Leadership Conference, and Stonebridge Media was hosting a panel on authenticity in corporate culture. Arthur was scheduled to speak. Amara was just supposed to attend. She didn't plan on saying a word, but fate, as usual, had other plans. Backstage, Arthur looked calm enough to fool a camera, but not her. She saw the tension in his shoulders, the quiet calculation in his eyes. "You've done 100 of these," she said, trying to sound casual. "Not like this," he replied. "This time I'm not selling a product. You're telling the truth." He nodded. "And that scares people more than anything else." Amara smiled faintly. "Good. Let them sweat." He chuckled softly. "Stay close. I always am," she said, though part of her wasn't sure if he heard the double meaning. When the lights dimmed and the first speaker introduced him, Arthur walked to the stage with steady, deliberate steps. The crowd of executives, journalists, and analysts quieted. He adjusted the microphone. "Good morning," he began, voice calm but resonant. "For years, I believed leadership was about control, about managing narratives, shaping images. But control," he paused, "is just a polite word for fear." A murmur ran through the audience. Cameras flashed. "I run a company that sells stories," he continued. "But lately the most powerful story hasn't come from a campaign or a press release. It came from one of my own employees, a woman who reminded us that belonging isn't granted. It's built." Amara's breath caught. Every head turned toward her table. Arthur didn't flinch. Her words went viral because they were true. And truth, as uncomfortable as it is, forces change. We can't hide behind corporate statements anymore. If our walls are built on silence, it's time to knock them down. The applause began slowly hesitant, then grew louder, but the moment wasn't finished. A moderator stepped onto the stage, smiling too tightly. "Thank you, Mr. Collins," she said quickly. "We'll now open the floor to questions." The first came sharp. "Aren't you worried, Mr. Collins, that this kind of rhetoric alienates your investors?" Arthur's reply was immediate. If truth alienates them, they were never investors in the first place, just shareholders of comfort. Another question followed. "Isn't it risky to let employees dictate the company's narrative?" Arthur smiled thinly. "Listening isn't surrender, it's survival." The room hummed with mixed reactions: admiration, skepticism, fear. But Arthur looked calm, lighter than Amara had seen him in months. Then from the back of the room a voice called out, "So where's this employee now? What does she think of her CEO's transformation?" All eyes turned. The moderator's smile faltered. Amara froze. Arthur looked toward her. His expression wasn't one of panic or expectation. It was an invitation. She stood slowly. She thinks Amara said, her voice clear, that change isn't a one-man show. It's a relay. He took the baton. A wave of surprised murmurs swept the room. The moderator gestured toward her. "Would you like to join us on stage?" Amara hesitated. Every instinct screamed no, but her heartbeat said yes. As she climbed the steps, Arthur moved aside, giving her space at the podium. "Your turn," he whispered. The lights were blinding. She could see shapes, not faces, just a sea of expectation. She took a slow breath, grounding herself in the sound of her own pulse. "When I first came to Stonebridge," she began, "I thought survival meant staying invisible. I believed that if I kept my head down and my voice quiet, I'd be safe." She paused. "I was wrong." The room stilled. Silence isn't safety. It's permission. Every time we choose not to speak, we build a higher wall for the next person to climb. Her voice grew steadier. "When I said belonging isn't granted, I didn't mean it as a slogan. I meant it as a warning and a hope. Companies love to talk about diversity, but diversity without empathy is decoration. And decoration doesn't last." A low hum of agreement rippled through the crowd. Amara glanced at Arthur. His expression was unreadable, but proud, his eyes locked on her like the rest of the room didn't exist. She continued softer now. "People like me, we don't need saviors. We need systems that stop breaking us. And that begins when someone in power decides to listen, not to defend, but to understand." The words left her like a weight exhaled. The applause started before she even stepped back. Afterward, backstage, Arthur found her leaning against the wall, breathing hard. "You hijacked my panel," he said, smiling. "Call it co-authorship." He laughed. "You were brilliant. Scared," she corrected, "but thanks." He nodded. "That's how change feels. Terrifying and right at the same time." They stood there for a long moment, the noise of the conference fading behind the curtain. Then he said softly, "You know what I realized while you were speaking?" "What, that you don't work for me anymore? You work with me." Amara looked at him surprised. "That's not something CEOs usually say." "I'm not the same CEO I was," he said. "You made sure of that." Her chest warmed. "Then I guess we both did something right." Later on the drive back to the office, the city blurred by outside the tinted windows. Arthur was quiet for a long time before saying, "They asked me afterward if we rehearsed that." Amara chuckled. "And you said I told them no, you can't rehearse the truth." She smiled out the window. "Guess not." "Amara," he said softly, "thank you for every word, every fight, every silence that wasn't really silence." She looked at him then, and for the first time she didn't see a boss or a headline or a symbol of privilege. She saw a man who'd learned how to listen, how to change, and maybe how to love without saying it out loud. The car stopped at a red light. He turned to her. "You changed the story, you know." She smiled faintly. "Good." It was time someone did. That night, the video of the speech went viral within hours. Not for controversy this time, but for hope. Headlines read, "From boardrooms to bridges, how a CEO and an employee redefined leadership." Amara didn't watch it twice. She didn't need to. She'd lived it. And somewhere in the quiet of his penthouse, Arthur watched it once, then turned off the screen, and smiled the kind of smile that comes when the story finally belongs to everyone. Spring melted into early summer, and with it came a strange calm, an aftermath of motion like waves settling after a storm. Stonebridge Media was thriving in ways no one predicted. Job applications doubled, partnerships grew, and for the first time in its history, the company's annual report led with people instead of profits. But for Amara, the real change wasn't in headlines or data. It was in the quiet moments, the way interns looked her in the eye now, the way employees spoke up in meetings, the way she no longer rehearsed her voice before using it. She was still learning to believe she belonged. But this time, she wasn't learning alone. Arthur had changed too. He'd stopped moving like a man trying to hold an empire together and started moving like one trying to understand it. He talked less in meetings, listened more. And when people asked about the company's transformation, he said the same thing every time. It started when someone told me the truth, and I finally heard it. But privately, there was one truth he still hadn't said. Not to the press, not to the board, not even to her. One Thursday evening after a long day of meetings, Amara found an email in her inbox. Rooftop. 8 p.m. No cameras, no speeches. AC. She smiled, shaking her head. He'd never quite learned subtlety. By the time she reached the top floor, the city had already started to glow. The Atlanta skyline stretched endlessly, washed in gold and violet. The rooftop lights were dim, soft like a secret. Arthur stood near the edge, hands in his pockets, hair slightly wind-tousled. The gray suit was gone. He wore a simple white shirt, sleeves rolled to his elbows. "Wow," Amara said, stepping out into the open air. "You actually exist outside boardrooms." He smiled faintly. "Occasionally, especially when I need reminding why I started all this." She joined him by the railing. The view below looked infinite, so she said, "What's the occasion?" "You don't usually summon people to rooftops unless you're starting a revolution or a scandal." Arthur chuckled. "Maybe both." For a while they said nothing. The city's hum filled the silence, cars' laughter, the heartbeat of a world still turning. Finally, Arthur spoke. "When I stood on this roof a year ago, I thought success meant distance. The higher you climb, the fewer people you can hear. But now—" He paused, glancing at her. "Now I think it means the opposite." Amara looked at him, curious. "And what changed your mind?" He smiled. "You did." Her breath caught. "Arthur." "No, let me finish," he said, his voice softer now. "You didn't just change this company, Amara. You changed me. I used to believe empathy made you weak. You taught me it's what makes you real." She tried to hide the tremor in her voice. "That was never the plan. I know," he said. "That's what makes it matter." The air around them felt charged, electric, but fragile. Arthur turned toward her fully. "You once asked me where I fit in this new world we're building. I think I finally have an answer." "And I don't," he said simply. "At least not without you." The words hung there, suspended between them and the skyline. Amara blinked, unsure whether to laugh or run. "Arthur." He stepped closer, not enough to cross a line, but close enough that the city's noise seemed to fade. "I know what people would say. About power, about boundaries. I know how it looks." She smiled sadly. "Then why say it?" "Because I'm tired of letting fear write the story." Her heart hammered. "This isn't the right moment." He shook his head. "There's never a right moment, just the honest one." For a long time, neither spoke. Amara turned away, gripping the railing, staring at the river of headlights below. "You're not the man I mistook for a driver anymore," she said quietly. Arthur smiled faintly. "No, but I still remember that morning better than any promotion I've ever had." She laughed softly. "That's sad." "Maybe," he said. "Or maybe it's proof that accidents can save us." She looked at him, then really looked. The wind caught his hair, the city lights painting soft gold across his face. He looked nothing like the man she met that day, but somehow still the same. "You're serious," she said, "as serious as I've ever been." Amara exhaled slowly. "Do you know what this feels like?" "What's standing on the edge of something terrifying? Again." He nodded. "Then let me stand there with you." Her lips curved into a small, reluctant smile. "You don't give up easily, do you?" "Not on things that matter." They fell silent again, both staring out at the sprawl of Atlanta beneath them, messy, beautiful, imperfect. Amara finally spoke, her voice soft but steady. "I don't know where this goes, Arthur. I don't know if it works or if we'll ruin everything we've built trying. Then we'll build it again," he said quietly. "Better." She turned toward him, and for once there was no barrier, no boardroom glass, no unspoken hierarchy. Just two people who had spent a year breaking patterns, daring to belong, and finally realizing that maybe this was what belonging truly felt like. Arthur reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, folded note. "You remember the first letter I wrote but never sent?" She nodded. "The one you said stayed in your drawer." He handed it to her. "I kept it because I wasn't brave enough to let you read it. Until now." She unfolded it, the paper soft from time. The ink had faded, but the words were still clear. "You made me see myself, and that will always matter more than what anyone else sees in me." Amara's throat tightened. She looked up. "You really don't do simple, do you?" He smiled. "Not when it comes to you." They stood together at the edge of the rooftop, the city glowing beneath them like a heartbeat. The air smelled faintly of rain and possibility. Amara slipped the letter into her pocket. "All right," she said. "No promises, no labels, just one agreement." Arthur tilted his head. "Name it. We keep building. Even when it's hard. Especially then." He nodded. "Deal." Then quietly, almost reverently, he reached out and took her hand. Neither of them looked down, only forward. And somewhere between the city lights and the quiet hum of the night, their promise settled, not the kind written in contracts or policies, but in the fragile certainty of two people who had learned how to listen, how to bend, and how to begin again. The first light of dawn spilled over the Atlanta skyline like a slow confession. For the first time in months, Amara arrived at the office without rushing, without rehearsing what to say, without the invisible weight that used to trail her through every doorway. She paused in the lobby, watching the morning sun reflect off the company's new mural, a wall-sized mosaic of faces, each tile contributed by an employee. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. At the bottom, engraved in clean letters, was the new company slogan Arthur had insisted on: "Belonging isn't granted, it's built." She smiled. It still startled her sometimes that her words had become part of the architecture. Upstairs, the building was unusually quiet. She passed a group of interns reviewing notes for the mentorship program, and they waved nervously like soldiers saluting their general. "You started a cult," Rachel joked when she caught up. Amara laughed. "If this cult serves coffee and fair pay, I'm okay with that." Rachel grinned, leaning against the desk. "So, big day. Why's that?" "The media team's filming a feature on the company's transformation. Arthur's doing interviews. They'll probably ask about you." Amara groaned. "Please tell them to find someone else. I'm allergic to microphones." "Too late," Rachel said, smirking. "You're part of the legend now." Amara rolled her eyes, but she couldn't help smiling. There was something surreal about it. The idea that one mistake, one rainy morning, one wrong car could have rewritten an entire company's story. By noon, the cameras were gone, and the office settled back into rhythm. Arthur appeared in her doorway just as she was closing her laptop. "You're avoiding interviews again," he said, leaning casually against the frame. "Self-preservation," she said. "Besides, you give better sound bites." He smiled faintly. "Not this time. They wanted to hear your version of it." "My version. The truth. Unfiltered." Amara tilted her head. "And what did you tell them?" "I told them the truth," he said softly. "That everything changed because one woman refused to stay silent." Her breath caught. "You really said that?" "Every word." There was no flirtation in his tone this time, just sincerity, steady and unembellished. She leaned back in her chair, watching him. "You're getting better at this vulnerability thing." "I'm learning from the best," he said, and for a moment their smiles mirrored each other. That afternoon they reviewed the company's annual community report side by side. It was a thick document, pages filled with statistics and projections, but between the numbers were stories, testimonials from employees, partnerships with schools, mentorships that had begun with a single conversation in a crowded break room. "See this," Arthur said, pointing to a section labeled The Johnson Initiative. Amara blinked. "You named it after me." He shrugged lightly. "You started it. I just gave it a budget." Her laugh was soft, disbelieving. "You know this is the part of the story people won't believe, right?" "Good," he said. "Let them think it's impossible. Maybe then they'll try to prove it isn't." When the workday ended, Amara didn't rush to leave. She found herself lingering at the rooftop door, the same one where everything had changed weeks ago. She pushed it open, stepping into the soft orange light of sunset. The city stretched below, humming with life. It was the same view as always, but it didn't feel the same. She didn't feel the same. Arthur joined her a few minutes later, 2 coffee cups in hand. "You're predictable," he said, offering one to her. "So are you?" she said, taking it. "You always find me here." He smiled. "It's my turn to listen. Remember?" They stood in silence, sipping coffee as the wind tousled their hair. Below, the sound of traffic and laughter blended into a single steady rhythm, the sound of life carrying on. "You ever think about that first day?" he asked. "Every time it rains," she said with a grin. "I used to wish I could redo it, say the right thing, look less like an idiot." She chuckled. "If you had, we wouldn't be here." "True," he said. "Maybe some mistakes are better left uncorrected." The sun slipped lower, staining the skyline in amber and pink. Amara spoke quietly. "You know what I realized, Arthur, what? That we didn't just change a company. We changed the story of what people like us can be inside one." He turned toward her. "People like us." She smiled. "The ones who don't belong until we make space for ourselves and each other." He studied her for a long moment, the corners of his mouth softening. "You've always been better at putting it into words." "Someone has to," she said, teasing gently. As night deepened, city lights blinked alive below. The rooftop breeze carried the faint scent of rain again, the same kind that had started it all. Arthur set down his cup. "You know," he said quietly, "I spent years building things that didn't matter. Buildings, brands, balance sheets. But this..." He gestured at the skyline, the company, the world they'd shaped together. "This matters." Amara looked at him, her voice warm but teasing. "Careful, you're starting to sound like a revolutionary." "Maybe I am." She smiled. "Maybe we both are." They stood side by side, the hum of the city below them, the wind threading softly through their hair. Arthur reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, a silver keychain shaped like a penguin holding a hockey stick. Amara laughed. "You kept that." "I had it remade," he said. "The original broke." She turned it over in her palm, tracing the little etched lines. "You're impossible." "I've heard that before," he said with a grin. "Usually from you." Their laughter mingled with the wind, and for a moment the world felt light again, like maybe everything they'd been through had led exactly here. As the last light disappeared behind the skyline, Amara leaned on the railing, her gaze steady. "So what happens next?" Arthur looked out at the same horizon. "We keep building. We keep breaking patterns. And we keep choosing truth even when it costs us." She nodded slowly. "And when it gets hard," he smiled, "then we'll remind each other why we started." A quiet settled between them, not the silence of distance anymore, but of peace, the kind earned, not given. Amara turned to him. "You know, I used to think belonging was a destination. And now I think it's a daily act." Arthur nodded. "Then let's make it our routine." As the city stretched into night, the two of them stood together at the rooftop's edge, coffee growing cold between their hands, hearts steady, unguarded. Below them the world pulsed with noise and possibility. Above them the stars began to appear, faint but persistent proof that even the smallest lights could break the darkness. And for the first time, Amara didn't wonder what came next. She just breathed. The wrong car had brought her here, but every choice after that, every word, every silence, every risk had been hers. And this time she wasn't just part of the story. She was the story.